Okay, so it's 12:05, so we can start with this webinar. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today to this fourth webinar of the series organized by the Mediterranean Biodiversity Protection Community Project of the Interreg Mediterranean Program. My name is Jordi Juarez, and I am project officer at the CPMR, the Inter-Mediterranean Commission, and we are partners of the project. So today we are meeting under the working group 2, which is called Sustainable Use of Natural Resources. And we will focus on Plastic Busters MPAs approach for marine litter prevention and mitigation. And concretely, we will see their tested measures in 9 Mediterranean marine protected areas. So before we start, I would like to kindly ask you to keep your microphones and cameras off and use the chat function to ask questions. But we will have a specific session at the end of the webinar where you will be able to take the floor and ask as much questions as you want. So just for your information, this meeting will be recorded and we will speak in English. So it will be held in English as well. So we have, let me briefly introduce the agenda we have for today. We have this first introduction to the Mediterranean Biodiversity Protection Community Project and the Working Group 2 goals that will be done by myself. Then we will move to the Plastic Busters MPAs approach for marine litter prevention and mitigation. We'll have then a peer feedback, peer reviewer that will be sharing the let's say the most interesting part of the project and the things that could be improved. And then we will move to the section where you will be able to take the floor and to ask questions. And finally, we will have this wrap up section with the conclusions, and also we'll be announcing our next webinar. So concretely speaking, for those who are not aware of or not familiar with the project, with the Mediterranean Biodiversity Protection Community Project, this is the second phase of Panacea project. Maybe some of you know about it, and it's the umbrella project encompassing several other thematic projects that we will see in the next slides. All of them are already finalized, and we have very, very interesting results coming from all of them. So the role of the project, of the NBPC for shorten, is to create a community and make sure that the approaches, the tools, and the results of all these projects, all these called thematic projects, can be easily integrated into policymaking in order to reduce pressures and impacts on biodiversity. So we have three working groups that are here in the screen. We have the working group 1, which is biodiversity protection and transboundary challenges. We have the working group 2, which is sustainable use of natural resources, in which we are organizing this webinar. And then we have the integrated ecosystem monitoring and management working group, the third one. So if we move to the working group 2 on sustainable use of natural resources, we aim at identifying, disseminating, and supporting the development of sustainable management approaches to promote participatory natural resource use systems at local, regional, and EU levels. So we have here in this working group several projects that are, as I said before, finalized, and some of the topics that they cover include governance mechanism, participatory approaches in wetlands, biodiversity monitoring, awareness raising for Posidonia beaches, management of of protected areas, and many others. So two of the main outputs of the project that have been developed within the community, and also they were built with the contribution of all the thematic projects. We have the ecosystem-based management declaration, which is a commitment to make sure that any of the works or activities consider this ecosystem-based approach. It was also presented to the European institutions, and you can still sign it and have a look. I will put later, or any of my colleagues, the link in the chat. Secondly, we also have the Mediterranean Biodiversity Protection Knowledge Platform, which gathers a lot of resources coming from the projects, and in an integrated way where you can look for a topic, where you can look for maps, for many kind of information that it's very useful. So we also have many publications and events that took place in the previous months or years. I will not go into detail, but this includes several technical and policy papers. We also organized several webinars showcasing best practices, such as the one that we are doing today. We also participated in different workshops with many Mediterranean stakeholders, and so on. Just to give you some information about one of the most relevant documents for the working group 2, we have our technical paper, which is called Participatory Approaches Towards the Co-Management of Natural Resources in Coastal and Marine Areas. And well, some of the best practices that are showcased here include some of the thematic projects, approaches, and tools that have been developed in the past years. And well, so each of them has its specific angle, and they focus on several things, such as small-scale fisheries, co-management models, wetlands, etc. So now I will give the floor to Luca Santa Rosa, which is the consultant for our MBPC Working Group 2. He will be moderating the session, and he will be also presenting the next parts of the webinar. I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jordi, and welcome to everybody. I give you the quick scratch, let's say, quick picture of the webinar structure and of the webinar goal, because we will have in a few minutes, we have Tomás Vlacogianni presenting us an overall description, let's say, of the project, but with a focus on specific best practices that were developed by the project on land, let's say, in actual context. And we will hear about also the results of such testing. And then we have Christos that will provide some inputs on these experiences, since Christos that is working in the coordination unit of the Mediterranean Action Plan, let's say, followed the project as associate partner. So he has a good view, a good perusal of the project. So he will highlight the strengths of the project, but also will provide some ideas, some suggestions for future follow-ups, let's say, of this practice. And finally, as Jordi anticipated in the last session, you, the audience, you are not so numerous, so it is also easier for you to take the floor. We expect also from you feedbacks on what you heard, similar experiences you had in your job, in your working life, and also ideas for further developments of the topic. So there will be room for everybody to provide such an inputs, because the final step of this webinar will be a report that we will spread around in the next 24 hours, gathering the main hints of this webinar. So gathering the main information about the project and about the the best practice showcased. The report will include the feedbacks from the peer reviewer, but also your contributions. So your contribution will be present in such a report that will be spread around to leave a legacy, let's say, from this webinar. That's all from my side. I leave the floor to Tommy that has to share her screen. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you very much, Luca and Jordi, for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. Just let me to share my screen before I make any crazy mistake. So I think you see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes, we see. Perfect. Yeah.
So thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And a big welcome also to the participants that are following this online. So my name is Tomais Vlachogianni. I am a Senior Program and Policy Officer at the Mediterranean Information Office for Environment, Culture and Sustainable Development. And for those who are not, who don't know us, we are a federation of 133 NGOs from all over the Mediterranean working on environment and sustainable development issues. I have been involved in marine litter related actions for the last 12 years now, and participating in different expert groups dealing with monitoring and assessment, but also with prevention and mitigation aspects of the problem. And within the scope of the PlasticBustersMPAs project, among other things, I coordinated the activities related to the prevention and mitigation pilots in different coastal and marine protected areas. So just a quick overview of the PlasticBustersMPAs project for those of you who are not familiar with it. This was a strategic Interreg-Med project, and it dealt with all aspects related to marine litter, from implementing harmonized monitoring approaches, diagnosing the impacts, identifying marine litter hotspots, building the capacities and transferring knowledge to different key actors, showcasing prevention mitigation measures, and also coming up with priorities for a joint governance plan. And one of the important aspects of this project is that it has the entire initiative within which this project is being implemented has been labeled by the Union for the Mediterranean. And happily now we are having the opportunity through an NECBC project to implement the experiences and lessons learned from the PlasticBustersMPAs in the South through the PlasticBusters Cup. This has been a project on the Science Policy Society interface, and in fact it has been fully aligned and contributing to the MSFT working group on marine litter, to the UFM related working groups, and to the Barcelona Convention Corbon group and the Medpol focal points group. I will not go into details, but just to tell you that we have been interfacing really strongly with the different policy initiatives in the region. And the entire project was initiated based on the fact that marine litter has been building up in coastal and marine protected areas. Here you can see some data that were collected in the Act for Litter project, which was a solid starting point for the PlasticBustersMPAs. And one of the key novelties of the project was that for the first time, an integrated and harmonized marine litter approach was applied in coastal and marine protected areas, where we monitored and macro litter and micro litter on the beaches, on the sea surface, on the sea floor, and in biota. And the idea was to generate fit for purpose, comparable and reliable data. And the entire approach aimed at providing the knowledge base for getting a better understanding of the problem and how does marine litter impact marine habitats and species, in order to identify possible solutions, select the appropriate solutions, and eventually put these solutions into action. And here I would like to really stress the fact that despite a lot of debates where plastics are being considered as the enemy here. One of the important aspects of the project was that we didn't seek to demonize plastics, but rather to promote the wise use of plastics within a circular economy context. Obviously, we cannot live without plastics. The majority of the items that we have and to facilitate our day-to-day lives are made of plastic. So yes, we can reduce the amount of plastic that we use, but then the amount that has been anyhow used, and we cannot afford not using it, must be used within a circular economy context. And this was the main principle of all our prevention and mitigation actions. Another important aspect of the project was that we paid a lot of attention on avoiding to promote false solutions or misconceptions about the problem. There used to be a time when a lot of decision makers around the Mediterranean thought that replacing, for example, single-use plastic bags made of conventional plastics with bio-based bags made of bio-based plastic or bags made of biodegradable plastic, that this will solve the problem. But the reality is that this change in the material just shifts the problem to another material and doesn't really solve the problem at the end of the day. And happily, there were also new European guidelines published where in order to facilitate the single-use plastics directive, where basically plastics manufactured with modified natural polymers or plastics manufactured from bio-based fossil or synthetic starting substances are not naturally occurring, and therefore they are treated the same way as all plastics. So this resolved the issue that was one of the problems that we had encountered at the beginning of the project. So when applying the different solutions, this is more or less what we have focused on operationalizing the waste hierarchy. And so our main aim of the different measures that were applied was either to promote the phase out or elimination of different items, or to encourage their use, or in very few cases to replace them with sustainable or more sustainable alternatives, and also to strengthen and improve recycling. So this was central in all of the prevention and mitigation measures that we applied. And how we approached the entire process. First of all, we gathered marine litter evidence on the extent of the problem, but also on the type of the problem. Then we assessed the organizational capacity and human resources of each of the pilot areas and the management priorities. And then in combination with a marine litter best practices inventory that we created and the kind of role that MPA managers can play, we ended up with a selection of a few typologies of measures for which we elaborated operational guidelines. So this is just an overview of the typologies of measures that were implemented. So measures focus on setting up a scheme to phase out the use of single-use plastics, measures focus on developing awareness-raising campaign, establishing a derelict fishing gear management scheme, and implementing an extended producer responsibility scheme. And this is just a snapshot of the pilot marine protected areas that participated in the testing and the replication actions of the project. Obviously, I don't have the time here to go into details when it comes to all the showcases of marine litter measures that were implemented in the project, and therefore I have selected some of them that seemed more interesting, or they were more diverse, in order to give you a broader overview of our actions. So the first measure that I would like to focus on is related to setting up a single-use plastics-free network of coastal food and beverage outlets. So the idea of this measure was to create a community of tourism and recreation related businesses in order to engage them and somehow support them in adopting measures against single-use plastics. So the entire approach was that these businesses, on a voluntary basis, joined this initiative. They signed a commitment where basically they expressed their interest to minimize the use of single-use plastics in their businesses. Then together we supported them in carrying out an audit on how much single-use plastics they use. Then we collectively identified the reduction targets and the measures to achieve them, and then they implemented these measures, and we monitored the entire process in order to award them with a certificate. And the first MPA that implemented this measure was the Strunyan Landscape Park, and the entire approach engaged more than 400 different types of stakeholders, and obviously from these stakeholders a smaller number were businesses. And these businesses, after attending some capacity building workshops and after completing the different steps that I presented, some of them were awarded the certificate. And here on this slide, you can see the first business that was awarded with this certificate. In fact, this activity was very successful, and the lessons learned fed into the guidelines that I mentioned before, and it was replicated in other MPAs that were pilot areas of the Plastic Busters. And obviously there were some challenges that were identified. For example, it was very challenging to identify proper alternatives that were also of low cost, but also they had high environmental performance. In the beginning, we got a lot of proposals to substitute items that were in use with biodegradable ones. Then we had to go through sort of an awareness raising and capacity building process in order to underline that substituting with another material won't solve the problem at the end of the day. It just changes the nature of the problem. And also another major challenge was the proper timing for implementing this kind of measure, because most of the businesses in the Mediterranean are functional on a seasonal basis. So during the winter time, they are, or off season, they are closed. And then during the season, it's very difficult to engage businesses in this kind of activities, because obviously they're overwhelmed with the kind of work that they have to do. And lastly, of course, some of the businesses were afraid that if, for example, they don't supply their customers with a straw or with a single-use cup, for example, that they might displease them and they might lose customers. And but in fact, what we learned from this entire exercise was that customers more and more are seeking environmental friendly solutions, and instead of displeasing them, in the end they were really pleased to see the proactiveness of the different businesses. So this was one of the examples of measures that we applied. Obviously I can talk for each of these measures and each of these showcases for hours, but I would rather present a more just a flare of the different measures, and then we can react and discuss further during the discussion session. So another interesting measure that we implemented was related to the fisheries and aquaculture sector, and particularly the aquaculture sector. And basically what we did was that we sought to establish a derelict fishing gear scheme, and we set it up, we contracted a management company, we identified appropriate solutions where to put up the derelict fishing gear disposal and storage place, and then we set up a pickup and transport scheme, and then of course capacity building measures were implemented in order to engage the fisheries and aquaculture sectors in using this derelict fishing gear scheme. And the testing area was the Thermaikos Gulf protected areas, and more than 22 tons of derelict mussel nets were collected from the pilot area. In fact, this is one of the, it's the biggest mussel production area in Greece, and I think it's the second or third biggest in the Mediterranean. Sadly, as you can see on the photograph, many coastal areas are polluted with the mussel sops that are being used for growing the mussel nets. And of course, this is what just happens on the coast, but in the seafloor things are even worse. So the idea was on the one side to remove these nets and restore the coastline in a good environmental status, and on the other side to put these nets in a circular economy context. And on the right hand side you can see the kind of material that was generated by a mechanical recycling plant here in Athens. So, and then of course this material was used in order to, with 3D printers, to generate some useful items. And obviously the impact of this measure was substantial in the area, and it was very much welcomed because it was a measure that was identified as a priority in a previous project, the Act for Leader project, and was part of their priorities in their action plans. But obviously there were challenges encountered, and one of the major challenges was related to the logistics. Initially, there was an issue about the storage of the collected mussel nets in the pilot area. And then also there was a big challenge related to transportation, because the transportation costs from northern Greece to Athens were substantial. So fortunately we managed to resolve this problem, but this is an aspect that should be taken into account when designing this kind of schemes. And also there was a conflict of interest coming up in the different discussions. But fortunately, through a consensus building project, a process, and through a bottom-up approach where everybody was treated as valuable agents of knowledge, we managed to resolve this conflict of interest and to conclude with this kind of activity. And lastly, another important showcase that I would like to highlight has to do with a reusable cup delivery system for beach bars. This activity was tested by the ACP RAC, and it was tested in the Natural Park of Ebro Delta. And the idea here was to, due to the fact that in beach bars, but also in beach festivals, a huge amount of cups is being discarded on the coasts, to introduce the idea of a reusable cup system. So here you can see the different steps for operationalizing such a system. So the initial point had focused on defining the operational and logistics requirements of the reusable cup, then engaging with beach bar owners and festival organizers, selecting what kind of cup, what kind of size, from what kind of material it should be made, what would be the format of the cup, then to set up a distribution and pickup scheme for the reusable cup, and also to ensure that a washing service was put in place, and then the scheme was set up and ran smoothly in the area. Of course, this measure again was quite successful and was very much welcomed, and by the management body of the natural park, but also by the local authorities and the local actors in the area. But there were, of course, challenges encountered. These were related to selecting the right cup, because as you can see here in the photograph, one type of cup was used, but then depending on the drinks, the businesses reported that an additional option of the cup could have been a nice approach. Then the washing service was challenging, because a lot of these beach bars are located on the coast. They don't have limited access to electricity. Maybe they don't have the space. So in the case of this measure, this was a service that was contracted, but obviously there are different modalities to operationalize this kind of measure. And then there were cup losses observed because simply people take these cups at home as a souvenir from their visit to the natural park. And lastly, assessing the environmental performance of the entire measure, because obviously for dropping off the used cups and picking them up and taking them to the washing service and back and forth, this generates, for example, CO2 emissions. So basically, more detailed analysis of the environmental performance of the measure would be something that we could do at the later or at the next phase of implementing the measure. And so basically, these experiences have been captured in two very important documents. The one is the methodology for operationalizing selected prevention and mitigation measures, and also the synthesis report that features in more detail the different showcases. And there you can see the different steps for the implementation and what kind of lessons learned, experiences, challenges were encountered. And of course, I invite you to visit the PlasticBustersMPAs project webpage in order to have a closer look. And lastly, I wanted just to highlight it that basically one of the greatest challenges, it's easy to talk about the measures, but then operationalizing these measures and turning basically science into policy and actions is one of the main challenges of our era. And from our experience from the project, instrumental to that end are fit-for-purpose data, promoting feasible and effective solutions. And in fact, this is one of the strengths, I would like to say, of the project, because basically our solutions focus more on social innovations and to a lesser extent to technological solutions, which are more challenging and resource intensive to implement. We provided a methodologically sound and science-based process to support the managers of marine protected areas to implementing them. Then coordinated and multi-level actions are essential. And in fact, on the one side, these measures were implemented in a coordinated manner through the Mediterranean, but obviously they can be implemented at different levels. And lastly, participatory decision-making and bottom-up approaches make all the difference at the end of the day, as they enhance also substantially the buy-in of the measures. And this was it from my end. I hope, even though I had to rush up and in order to allow for more time for discussions, that you managed to get a quick overview of what was the focus of the project. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Also because you managed to stay in the slot time we gave you, so fantastic. But also the presentation was very interesting, touching different key challenges, let's say, of the overall topic of marine littering, and presenting some good experiences. Before moving to the next speaker, Christos Ioannidis, I would like to ask you very quick things concerning the experiences you presented. First, starting with the experience in Strumium, where you try to reduce, let's say, the quantity of single-use plastic. You told us that 400 actors took part, let's say, in the test. That is a huge number, but more or less, how many of them were private actors using, let's say, testing actually the measures you proposed them?
Yeah, because the entire action was coupled with the participatory science and awareness raising component. That's why the outreach was, and these 400 actors were directly involved in the activity. The businesses that joined the network were affected by the network, because not all of them managed successfully within the time frame to obtain the certificate. Were around 30 businesses, and around 10 managed to receive the certificate. This is an ongoing action, obviously, because it's been coordinated by the management body of the MPA. And obviously, you have to keep in mind that the Stronian Landscape Park is a very small, because Slovenia has a rather very small coastline. So for the basically almost all businesses that are situated on the on the coastline have been engaged in the action. So yeah, it was.
Yes, you know, so it was a significant sample, I would say,
yes,
no? for testing the measure. And you told us also that the customers showed their appreciation for such a measure. I mean, did you implement any question, any customer satisfaction survey for saying this?
Well, we didn't do it in a structured, organized way. This was basically the feedback that we received from the businesses. Okay. That they were really concerned about this, and
yeah, they were happy because the customers were appreciating.
Yes, actually, they were amazed because some customers were really they were seeking this kind of solutions, and actually from other pilot areas, where we have more systematically assessed the customer satisfaction, it is reaffirmed that basically people are more aware from all this plastic pollution awareness raising, that they're bombarded daily, that they are shocked if they get a straw.
Thank you so much. I have other questions, but I see one guest, Dania Abdumalak, raising the hand. It is on the same topic, Dania.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you, Tommy, for the interesting presentation. From my side, I mean, what worries a little bit, I think all of us, is what comes after the project ends, no? What is the uptake and what is the sustainability of maintaining these very important measures in place? So I don't know, in the different cases, there are things that I think are easily uptaken than others, such as changing the cups, for example, then the aquaculture measure that is quite intense in terms of funding and things like that. What can be mentioned from your side in terms of the possibilities after the project ends, that the long-term sustainability is ensured?
Just to see if I got it clear, you mean the long-term sustainability in the pilot areas or the replication in other areas?
I think even in the pilot areas, that's to consolidate, that after the project, these things at the different levels, the different measures are maintained. And certainly the uptake is an important question, but that I think requires like a different scope.
Well, for example, in the case of the single-use plastics network, because in essence, the businesses that took up these measures, they are continuing to implement them. They just transform their businesses. So by default, there is the sustainability element. Now already the landscape park of Strunyan transferred this experience to another landscape park, and they have big plans of trying to promote this within the different not just coastal MPAs, but protected areas in general in Slovenia. So this is fantastic news, for example, and this was the case also in other areas. But even for the derelict fishing gear, in fact, the activity continues to carry on, and now in Greece, it has been picked up by the Deputy Minister of Environment himself, who visited the site, and he would like to do something, at a larger scale in Greece. So from the pilot areas to either going to other areas or being maintained, this is actually secured, because a lot of effort was put into that, and essential to that and was working with local actors. It is not us who went there and implemented the activity, but rather provided the seed money to local actors to initiate that kind of actions, because they had identified that as a priority. So by default, the sustainability aspect was embedded in the design of these pilots.
Thanks, Tommy. Maybe because of my fault, we already started discussion, but we have to wait the peer reviewer also introduction, contribution. But just a last question, very quick from my side, about the reusable cups implementation in Ebro Delta protected area. Can you give us some figures as to in how many events or in how many businesses it was tested? Or
yeah, to be honest, now maybe because we have Ignazi online, who was directly involved in the activity. Maybe he could, because at the top of my head now I don't remember the number of businesses. Ignazi, do you have any figure in mind?
Hello, I'm Ignasi
Hi.
Mateo from the Catalan Waste Agency and the CCP RAC. And the number of beach bars that participate in the pilot were 14, and then we implemented also in 10 festivals in the area. And the pilot will be replicated this summer. So regarding the sustainability of the pilot, it's a good news.
Good.
Nice to see you, Tommy.
Thanks so much. Okay, I stop with questions and I give the floor to Ioannis Christos. Let me read his family name.
It's a difficult one.
Sorry for my bad pronunciation. As I said, he's working for the Mediterranean Action Plan Coordinating Unit in Athens, and he, as I followed the project as associate partner, so he has a good view of the project, and we asked him to, as I said, to highlight the good points of the project and of these best practices, about mitigation measures, and also to suggest us mainly to the project partnership, but also to all of us, some potential fields of improvement, of development of such an interesting topic. Please, Christos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, colleagues, for the invitation. As always, I'm very happy to be part of attending this community's meetings. And after the very nice comprehensive presentation presented by Tommy, I will spend a few minutes in giving our opinion about the project and the outcomes of the project in our work, and how the project outcomes are feeding our work. So my name is Christos Akimidis. I work for UNEP-MAP and its medical program. I'm a marine litter expert and I'm project officer at the Secretariat dealing with issues pertaining to marine litter. This was just a short introduction for those who have not had yet the chance to meet. So can you please, can we go to the next slide? Okay. As Luca, you have nicely introduced, UNEP-MAP has been following actually the Plastic Busters project as of its day zero, I must say. I mean, from its inception phase till its concluding date. We have been very much attending the meetings and closely following up the relevant deliverables. Let's say what made Plastic Busters so important was that it, in a very nice way, it combined elements on monitoring and assessment on aspects which are very sensitive, like the marine protected areas, and also on aspects related to the effect of marine litter on the biota. Because these two, I mean, are still two very big questions on marine litter, which still we need, I mean, as a community and as a scientists and as policy officers and as a governance, let's say, frameworks, we need to respond in a more, let's say, pragmatic and realistic way. So the project strengthened the evidence-based and the tailor-made approaches. It has been very important that those approaches were tested in different settings, as nicely also introduced and described by Tommy. The approaches addresses different pressures and features wide-ranging actions, and certainly they correspond to the policy priority and the state of play. So this is a bit of the four pillars that we think that they were very, very important from our side to get involved to this process. Moreover, the fact that the measures are fully and solely aligned with the updated regional plan is something of great consideration as well. For example, there have been measures, actually prevention and mitigation measures focusing on the phasing out single-use plastics, overall on beaches, but on beaches, but also on the overall the campaigns, for example, the cigarette butts, the the work around the LDFG, the abandoned, lost, and otherwise discarded fishing gear, and the mussel farms, and the establishment of networks for single-use plastics, focusing on food and beverage outlets, which is very much linked with the APR work that SCP-RAC is doing. Of course, the adoptability schemes and the beverage containers, the reuse options for that have been introduced in beach bars and other occasions. Certainly, the promotion of best practices. So these are, let's say, I have extracted these measures, these kind of things, these kind of measures that were, I think, that were mostly linked with our work. Moreover, Plastic Busters had contributed to with the policy recommendation paper that was coordinated by SCP-RAC and by my friend colleague Ignacy and also Magdalene Pedro, which gave some policy recommendations focusing on the specific provisions of the regional plan. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, as we have understood, as I have described, the Plastic Busters measures and let's say the final recommendation were in line with the priority measures addressed by the updated regional plan. These are some examples on how the Plastic Busters had was introduced or was linked with the updated regional plan. And the important thing is that through these pilot actions, actually the applicability of which has been well documented in most of the cases, we found a strong linkage with the specific provisions of the regional plan. However, we need also to take into account that working in local level is very important because it gives the hint, and it gives also creates a good basis for the for having things at national level in a more concrete and more stable way. Just to tell you an example, for example, in Tunisia, the work that was done under the voluntary commitments and the work that was done under the pilot basis around the country turned up to build and to develop a nationwide legislation on phasing out single-use plastic. So we should never forget that working at local level and working with smart solutions and smart measures which do not require significant resources, and that can be replicated in a very easy way. It's equally important to having a broad framework giving these requirements. If we could move to the next slide, please. This is the policy recommendation paper that I have described to you. This was presented during the regional meeting on marine litter best practices in Seville that was co-convened with the Marlise 2022 conference. And the four major findings that we came, I mean, there is a very detailed work, and there's a table where details the specific recommendation against the specific measures, and maybe I don't know if Ignacio could share it with you for further distribution. We found that there are four main elements that have been considered in priority. The high replication and transferring of the scalability potential. So most of the actions that have been used by the project can be actually implemented and piloted in all countries and all local areas around the Med. The feasibility of the measures with relatively low cost that do not require a high level of skills, because sometimes we very often, and very easily recommend measures, and we say, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, but when a recommendation for a measure comes, we need to have a very strong socioeconomic assessment study. So we need to understand how much this measure will cost, whether the countries or the ex-country is in position to implement it, and also whether the society is ready to grasp this change, because these are two elements. The cost and the social acceptance, let's say, or whether the society is ready to accept the measure. These are two roads that go in parallel, and at a certain time they meet to the common goal, which is to put effective legislations in place. Moreover, those measures can be initiated or to be operationalized by wide-ranging stakeholders. This is another element that we need to consider, and I think that Plastic Busters did a great job on this aspect. That nowadays we need to include all stakeholders and to be as inclusive as possible during this process. Either this is relevant to a small, let's say, low or medium scale company like the beach bars with 2-3 persons from the company, or to up to the big industry. So this kind of now of range of stakeholders being engaged to these measures, it has been really broadened, and the project has demonstrated a great success in this regard. And the last one is the socially acceptable measures, because as you know, and I believe that the whole group attending this today's meeting knows, I mean, if the society is not ready for the change, I mean, whatever this measure might be, this will inevitably end up in a failure. So we need, first of all, to guide, to increase awareness, and to prepare the society for this kind of changes. And if you don't mind to go to the next slide, please. Now, brainstorming and reflecting on the project outcomes, there are potential areas for improvement and for further development. As Dania said, that the next day is always very important, and it's very important to also put some questions or some elements on the way forward, either for the community that have been working in the framework of the project, or either to be used by by other projects which have, let's say, similar scope or goal, or for follow-up projects that came after the Plastic Busters. So to assess the environmental and economic impact and the implications of the measures in a more comprehensive way, in order to see where further improvements can be made to enhance their effectiveness. This is very important across the board. I mean, for all measures that are proposed, and especially for measures that now we say that they have been implemented at local level and that there is a great potential for replicability. So these kind of assessments are really necessary to prepare the solid ground for the replicability of the measures. To develop a comprehensive inventory of appropriate alternatives for single-use plastics. Generally, there is a big myth, that accompanies the single-use plastics. There are many alternatives that are proposed. Not all of them are fully sustainable, or not all of them are fully documented. I mean, they are supported by science-based evidence. And it's very, very important that this was something that the project did very well, that we need to have, solutions that can fly, and that they show us the next day where we should move forward and how this should be done. Then it touches upon the very sensitive matter, which is the involvement of fisheries and aquaculture in the generation of marine litter. For those being involved in the governance and overall management of marine litter, you know that engaging this kind of things in our agenda is not the easiest way. Also, the stakeholders being around these areas of, let's say, this economic sector are quite sensitive. So the ALDFG and whether we could give business potential to these initiatives are very important, and we still need to learn more about this. About the reusable cup systems, it would be nice to have them tested at a larger scale. Let's say a big coastal city, maybe a big coastal touristic city, could be an ideal candidate for this system to be used, and to seek for new, creative, engaging, and ways to ensure higher buy-in from different stakeholder groups. This is also this actually pertains the more effectively and actively involvement of the industry and of the stakeholders. So this is also an area that we would very much like to see some further progress after later on, let's say, in the follow-up steps, either from new projects, either from the follow-up steps of the project. I think this is my last slide. I would like to to thank you for the time and for the invitation. I hope I respected the timeline, and I certainly stand available should any additional clarification be needed. And also, I'm very open to receive questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christos, for your perfect, clearly focused contribution to what the project developed. I see one hand raised by Tommy. Please, Tommy.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Christos for really this very constructive feedback on the entire project. Indeed, he has been following us from day zero, it's true. And I really appreciate him finding the time to join us here today. And actually, I just wanted one point that Christos made to add on to that. You know, because you asked me earlier, and Dania asked me earlier about about the numbers, for example. You know, at the end of the day, the numbers are not necessarily telling the entire picture. For example, you can have only one business engaged in a coastal area, but this business is the business or the only business, and it's a chain, basically, a huge hotel or a huge, actor in the area. So maybe the number one doesn't say much, but then this actor, by being engaged in, for example, the single use in the SOUPS network, for example, it makes the difference at the end of the day. So it is not so much this kind of actions that we implemented at local level. They were and actually in areas that are not so densely populated. It was not about the numbers. It was more about paving the way towards a behavioral change. This local context provided the ideal environment for, having small consultation meetings. Things are more manageable, more controllable, in order to identify the path that we should follow in order to phase out certain products and in order to ensure that our coasts and seas are protected. So this was the idea. So it's not about numbers at all at the end of the day. It's more about the process and how this process can then be upscaled or replicated at other local contexts or at bigger areas.
Thank you, Tommy. And let me also thank you and Christos also for your huge engagement in preparing this webinar. I tell to the others that they were our speakers were the last week they were traveling in other meetings, etc. So they spent the weekend to prepare the PowerPoint and to stay with us. Also, Christos had other meeting today in the morning, but we are very happy to see you here and to see you how much engaged you are in this topic. But I stop. I leave the floor to the audience. If anyone want to raise a question or to provide a feedback or to offer a hint, a consideration on what we heard till now.
Okay. So on my
who want to speak? Please introduce yourself.
So I'm learning French, but I'm French.
Sorry, we don't hear very well. Who is speaking?
So this is the timetable.
Sorry, I think that the noise comes from me. Sorry, I will mute.
Okay. So any intervention from the audience? Dania and Stephanie. To me, if you can put down the hand, please. Please, Dania, and then Stephanie. Dania? No, Dania is no more with us. Stephanie?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So I'm Stéphanie Houdin. I'm a public officer at the Région Sud, Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, and I'm a partner of PostBMed2 project. And I have a question about the commitments process that you implemented in the, especially with beach bars, users, or restaurant. Did they sign the charter, or what kind of tool do you use first to make them sign and then to follow their commitment?
Luca, we will go question by question?
No, question by question. Yes, please
Okay.
answer.
Thank you, Stephanie, for this interesting question, because, when you see the nice graph that I prepared, things seem very simple. And then just this topic, it occupied us for extensive days, because the issue was that the idea of this commitment was not, because this is a measure implemented on a voluntary basis, okay? And we don't want to discourage businesses from day zero. We want to have them on board. So this commitment was more about, how to say, for them to express interest in joining such a network. So to get this expression of interest more formalized on the one side from their end, but also from our end, because in fact, we co-signed this document. It was not exactly a commitment, it was a memorandum of understanding where we, as the project, committed ourselves to assisting them at every step of the way through technical assistance to implement their commitment. Okay, so basic, and also this had to do with the confidentiality aspect. So because some of them were afraid that, I don't know, maybe we will go public with, I don't know, the amount of soup they use and do bad publicity for the business. So this memorandum of understanding was providing a safety net basically for them. And it was acting as a tool to encourage them to join. They would have support throughout of the way. There was no, that they were expressing just the interest. There was no commitment to achieve the target. This would be assessed at a later stage, and if they would achieve it, they would be awarded with a certificate. This was the approach in order to have as many people on board as possible. It was a sensitive aspect of the entire operation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks to me. Dania, do you manage to?
Yes, I think so. Do you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my question goes around this interesting, testing of the city of Barcelona. So, Ignacy, do you have, some reactions on whether this was useful, it worked, whether it can be replicated, whether it worked only for 1 year and it stopped, or it's still, going on? I think these are very interesting uptake to larger scales. Yeah.
Hello, Dania. Yes, this pilot is working on the city of Barcelona for, I think, 5 years now. And the thing is, it's for the beach bars to include this cap reuse is mandatory. On the permit, they have to ask. They need to implement this reusable system. And it's working now in Barcelona. You pay €1, and then when you return back the cap, you can have the deposit back. So it's working now.
So these bars don't have any reusable, any single-use plastic cups. So either you take it for €1 or you don't take it.
Yeah, no, the thing is, if you take the cap for the beach and you are not taking the beer on the beach bar, you pay the €1. If you are stay in the beach bar, you don't pay the €1. But if you buy the beer to go to the beach, you have to pay the €1. The problem in Barcelona is that there are hundreds of bars near the beach, and there are people who are selling mojitos and gin tonics in the beach directly, and this is another problem. But in the beach bars, they are working this measure.
Thank you, Ignacy.
Thank you. Any additional issues, contributions, experiences to add?
Well,
In the meanwhile, I have 2 questions.
yeah, okay.
No, Stephanie, please.
But I'm sorry. Yeah, I asked a question in the conversation. If I did not get it, if beach bars, restaurants, and so on have a distinctive sign showing that they are part of the project, that they are, let's say, plastic-free actors and things like that, for customers to see it.
Yes, for the SUPS network, when they get awarded with a certificate, this is something that it is together with a sticker that they put in a very prominent part of their spot of their business. So yes. Now for the activity that Ignacy was describing, I think as well, because they have also some communication materials on the bar to, highlight the fact that they're implementing the reusable cup system. But maybe Ignacy can say a little bit more about that.
Yes, the caps, they have the logo of Plastic Busters and the logo of the natural park. They have not a specific free plastic beach bar, but they have another communication material explaining the pilot, so the people can know about it directly in the beach bar.
Okay, Christos.
Yes, Luca, just a comment from my side. I would like just to highlight that, that the measures that they tackle directly to this particular, let's say, problematic product on marine litter are equally important to measures that have a wide effect and wide outreach to public audience. And to us and to me, both kinds of measures are equally important, and especially those measures that were driven and were piloted by the project. Having a big outreach to really, touristic areas or to broad audiences and citizens groups are of great importance. So we should not neglect them as well, and we need to focus in both aspects. Thank you.
Okay. If there are not other contributions, I have one question, one comment. The question is to some of you, to Tomás or whoever, about prevention of marine littering from the fishery sector. No, you told about the collection and recycling of the dispersed gears, fishing gears. But what about how to prevent this dispersal in the marine environment of the gears?
So yes, because I didn't focus that much on this aspect. This was one part of the story. The entire approach of the Derelict fishing gear scheme was to ensure that the aquaculture-related gear, but also from the fisheries, are discarded properly in the first place. Because before the project being operational, basically they were either discarded at sea. That's why there is a huge, massive problem with mussel nets on the seafloor, or they were being discarded in some parts of the coast, and accumulating, and nobody was doing anything with them. So the idea was to define specific points and to provide the necessary facilities for the fishermen and the aquaculture plants to discard these items in an organized way, and then these to be collected and transported in an organized way to a treatment facility. The unfortunate part was that this treatment facility was located in Athens, but from what I hear is that now this business is kind of booming and more facilities for fishing gear are popping up in different areas of Greece and in different countries. So hopefully the future of this activity will be more smooth, because obviously transporting these materials from there to southern Greece is challenging. And also because this was one of the demo measures, we had also another one that was in fact again coordinated by ACP RAC, and it was implemented in Italy, and it was in Trieste, and another protected area there. So there the idea was to raise the awareness of fishermen on how to implement best practices on board, and how to ensure that there will be no releases of litter items on board through accidental loss. Because, okay, one aspect is to set up these points where they will bring them ashore. But the other thing is that there are also accidental losses, because, I don't know, for some reason these collected items are not being secured on board. So this was another component of another showcase. I didn't focus on that today here, but you can have a look at it and the results that it yielded in the synthesis report that I mentioned. So prevention was at the heart of this activity.
Yeah. Thanks to me. Jordi?
Yeah, I have a comment from a thing that was said before, but in any case, I think that it's relevant, this like the support that was offered to business, because I mean, we should keep it in mind, in my opinion, because sometimes they really want to eliminate the single-use plastic, but they don't really know how to start, and they also need to know what are the alternatives. So this inventory that was mentioned by I think it was Christos should be, well, could be very, very interesting for like to share it with the business and try to help them and offer this support as well. So that was the comment.
If I may react to this comment, you know, it's something that it's easier said than done.
Yes,
because,
yes.
for example, first of all, the thing is that this kind of inventories, if we don't want to have, how to say, a general description, and if we want to have specific solutions proposed, you know, specific products to replace or whatever, this has to be conducted at the national scale. And we try to do that in Slovenia, to map all the different products that exist in the market, but then somebody has to go deeper and see what these kind of products are, what they claim they are and what they truly are, and then to do a screening basically, and then, you know, come up with a shorter list of the real alternatives, the proper alternatives. And this is truly very challenging. I hope that despite we provided some guidelines on how to filter and screen these alternatives, but maybe some more detailed guidelines in the future would be a good idea on this, on how to do the screening and how to, you know, we provided the principles, you know, that, for example, or some aspects that are highlighted also by now legislative documents, as was mentioned for the case of biodegradable or compostable plastics, for example, that the Commission provided new guidelines on that. So they are considered to be the same as conventional plastics in the SUPS directive framework. So it requires more work to have something more solid and concrete. And hopefully we'll be able to do such an inventory in the near future.
Thanks to me. Christos?
Yes, just more like a piece of information to follow up on what Tommy has proposed, that UNEMAP has produced in 2019 the guidelines for phasing out single-use plastic bags, and recently SCPRAC has prepared some very nice guidelines tackling single-use plastics of priority in the Med. So this could be very much aligned with what Tommy has proposed, and of course this is part of our work, and generally we want and we aim in having a coherent, coordinated approach in the implementation of the measures when it comes at regional level, and certainly this kind of guidelines are available and should be a great source of inspiration for all the people that are willing to work along those lines.
Okay, thank you, Christos. And since the time is running, I want to pose a specific challenge, let's say, in our discussion, that is the following. Tackling marine litter is a wide problem with many faces, it needs the involvement of different stakeholders, etc. But I see that for some, or maybe for most of the faces of this problem, one point is the economic side of the problem. I refer to the economic profitability of the measure, in the sense, if we talk about marine littering in Mediterranean, we are talking about the users of the coastline, and most of them are from the economic actor world. Most of them are little actors, no? So for a big actor, it is interesting for many reasons, also for greenwashing, for whatever, to invest on this. But for little actors, for little businesses, such a new behavior cannot be driven only by ethical reasons. No, I think that you share this concern. So I guess that one field of development, let's say, of such a set of different measures must focus on how much rentability can become for a little bar, like a bar in a beach, to endorse and to apply such measures. Of course, this cannot be restricted to the choice of the little bar. No, I mean, there is also something in the plastic producing system, no, that must change. No, new products, new techniques, etc., etc. Also, that public must support this. But finally, I see that many change of behaviors that can be spread around, no, that can influence a lot of actors without having public funds for this, should rely on also an economic profitability that is linked, of course, on the, for example, customer appreciation of such choices, etc. But also, I guess that also from the pure cost structure point of view, when I talk of we, I refer to the policymakers, etc. We can do better in order to make the reusable goods or the bio-based tools, etc., more cheaper than the plastic ones. It refers also to choice at juridical level, etc. But I guess that we realize that any sustainable practice that spread around easily was the ones that proved to be more economic, cheaper than the traditional ones. So I think that I put this as an issue in the discussion. I don't know, Tommy, Christos, what do you think about?
Yeah.
Yes, look, I could.
Christoph, go ahead.
Please.
No, it's okay.
I could make an initial attempt to reply to your question, which is very nice. I mean, it's triggering a lot of elements to be included in the reply, possibly. We often say that we need to come with a business potential for the measures that we're proposing, especially when it comes to small businesses. However, we also as a society and as an entrepreneur sector, let's say, we need to start putting some baseline on how we do business and what do we offer to the society. The respect to the society, to the marine, into the environment, but primarily to the society, is something that applies across the board, from the scientist who is getting a PhD and is, let's say, offering his service to the science, to the coffee maker, which is giving, let's say, a plastic cup of coffee to the buyers every day, etc. So now this is where the society comes, and where we say that we need to establish a very solid basis and a very solid societal perception on what we do and how we do it. The society needs to put some rules, and it needs to, let's say, to give a hint and to promote those people that they do business correctly, in the sense that we prefer to go to a restaurant which uses sustainable resources, let's say, to prepare the meal, or to that it uses, let's say, fishes that they are sustainably caught, etc., and that we avoid going to those who do not apply these rules, or they use resources which have no traceability and no proof of from where they came, etc. In that sense, moreover, the profitability entails a risk, because somebody could easily come and say, okay, incentives, let's give incentives. But what kind of incentives? And then where do we stop with that? This was also the case for the fishing for litter methods that were the active schemes that were applied maybe 10 years ago, and very soon they were discarded because there was no way to really control these things. Doing business correctly should be fundamental for a client to visit this business and to ask for a cup of coffee, to ask for a plate with food, to go to the beach, for example, etc. I think this is the response, and this is where the business potential comes in. The low scale business, let's say the small businesses, cannot ensure a high tonnage, let's say, of elements, and maybe this is where the foundations and the associations could come in to put let's say bigger market potential to what we do, and I believe that this is more or less the way forward. Thank you.
Tommy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I found your remark quite interesting and challenging. And as Chris nicely said, it triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind. So I understand the concern that we cannot rely on the ethical aspect, but also I will be very blunt that in general, the profitability of such schemes that we presented is limited. It's not about the profit, it's doing the proper thing. So the thing is now, and obviously when we talk about small businesses, okay, for sure, single-use plastics, let's say, they have a cost. So by eliminating them, there are small wins for the business, okay? And if they don't go for replacing them, okay, with some other exotic alternatives. So in that sense, there are small profits. And we demonstrated that in the project. We sort of mapped the savings that were made by the small businesses instead of spending them for buying single-use plastics. But for sure, of course, when plastic has such a low price, it's very difficult to have, bigger savings, let's put it like that. But on the other side, for example, things can be triggered in a different way, and I will give you an example. We have, some years ago, we carried out a socioeconomic implication studies in the Adriatic, and we saw that on average, for each municipality, the cost of collecting litter from the beaches is around 200,000 euros, okay, for the municipality. So if the municipality, instead of waiting until the beaches are littered and collecting the litter, invests a small part of this amount of money for raising the awareness of businesses and promoting the phase out of certain items, or for putting in place proper facilities for the collection of items, the cost from cleaning up the beaches will be substantially reduced. So there is somehow savings made for the municipality on the one side, and on the other side, the local businesses can be supported in doing the proper thing. Or, for example, if in the permits for the different businesses, there is a clause or a term indicating that, or obliging the business to be in line with sustainability principles, then this could be another approach to things. So it's not that much about profit, because it's going to be very difficult. I mean, we saw it repeatedly, even, for example, with the so-called circular economy models that we see, collecting, I don't know, the fishing gear, transferring it, treating it, recycling it, and then making a new product and finding a market for this product. All these steps that sound so nice, they entail a cost, and a relatively big cost. So if the real cost of plastic, which is not eternalized, it's externalized, to my understanding, plastic should be one of the most expensive materials, because the environmental treatment of this at the end of the day, the end of life treatment, is an expensive business. So, maybe we should start looking things from a different viewpoint. It's not so much about making profit in order to do the proper thing, but doing it by default. This is one thing. And then putting different administrative or governance mechanisms that, instead of cleaning up the mess, will try to ensure that everybody is doing the proper thing so we don't end up with a mess. Okay, and then supporting the proper thing by internalizing the end of life of plastics in the actual price. So this way things can, work, but it's a complicated thing, that's for sure. And for now, for the time being, in many cases, our entry point with the businesses is that they can make small savings and they can serve the needs of their customers, which is true. It has been confirmed and reconfirmed, maybe not for so much for the south of Europe, but for example, Central and Northern Europe, already the customers from these countries demand that the different options they are offered with are complying with environmental criteria. So this is, for now, the easiest entry point. And in the long term, some of the other aspects that I mentioned could be operationalized, but it is difficult, for sure. It's not an easy ride to achieve sustainable consumption and production patterns.
Thank you, Tommy. I fully agree your approach. That means there is not just one solution. I know it is, of course, the unit price of the plastic is so low that it is difficult to find alternatives cheaper than the plastic. But as you said, let's say, I think that there are two main considerations that can pave the way. One is that you have to work at destination level, so not just the single economic operator, no, but planning together at the destination an overall set of measures, no, where also the SME has his economic interest in applying the measures because, for example, the municipality decrease the taxes for waste collection, whatever, etc., etc. And the other principle is to apply also to internalize the cost of the life cycle assessment of the whole chain. So, as you said, it is possible, but it's complicated. It needs a strong synergy, no, between private and public sector. But I agree with you, but also with myself that the final one indicator for an economic operator is the cost, no, of these measures. So yeah, we have to tackle this final, let's say, question by a little economic operator when proposing them something to change in their daily work. Okay.
And, Luca, just if I may just add on one last element, just to keep our audience thinking from the experience. Yeah. For even the concept of a reusable cup, okay, which we tried, for example, to apply it in Zakynthos, okay. It sounds very simple, people give a deposit of €1 and then they get it back when they return the cup. But for example, in Greece, where the taxation system is quite complicated, it was very difficult because a business cannot receive money without issuing a receipt. Okay, so by issuing a receipt, the amount issued on the receipt is taxed. Okay, so the whole concept of returning then back the taxed amount, it was so complicated for the business that, for example, we approached the taxation office to get an exempt from the tax, which is very complicated. You see, even this small solution that, this very easy, straightforward solution, it sounds easy, but it's not easy when you introduce also the concept of monetary terms and in the grand scheme of things, if we think all these kind of issues and then also the concepts of, we can understand that it's very complex, and operationalizing measures and trying to come up with savings or some kind of profitable profit. So just to put things in another context and to make our audience realize that, things are very difficult, but not impossible.
And crucial is the role of the public sector to steer the process, to set up the framework. Dania.
Yes, I'm conscious of time, but I think, again, confirmation that the measures are very good, but they cannot be sustainable on the long term if there are not really governmental questions supported. So I think there's a need of a certain protection to these mechanisms through whatever labeling or whatever process to ensure that there is a whole frame that ensures that all these questions, for example, the taxation on the money that you receive back as a small business, are considered, but certainly it's not profitable to go for more sustainable solutions, and we see that across any sector. So definitely framing that under a certain protection measure from the governments towards the sustainability of small businesses mainly. I think it's a measure that needs to be ensured to make that replicable and easy to use, because the measure itself could be very interesting whenever it's very well done in the context of a project, but to replicate it, it needs to be somehow automated in terms of process. So all these small questions that are obstacles are in a way resolved in the process itself. So maybe a certain labeling to how this could be replicated or so is a good take-home message for replication and transferability.
Thank you, Dania. Anyone else for the last contribution? Tommy, please open your mic.
If I may say something very quickly, just I wanted to clarify that, of course, I agree with Dania on her last point, but just to highlight that this is relevant for specific measures, because there are other measures that even, for example, when they are applied in an MPA scale, okay, that their replicability or their sustainability, if it's part of the management plan of the area, you know, by default, these measures are being implemented and operationalized. So it's not always necessary to have support, let's say, from the government, let's put it aside, and the public policy side. But then for other measures, indeed, things would be way easier if, for example, at the national level, schemes to, for example, for a reusable cup, or, you know, special regulations to ease up the work. I mean, I recall at some point in time that the collecting fishing gear from the sea was a huge problem in Italy, because when different initiatives would bring the fishing gear at land, this was considered as a special category of litter, and they had to pay a certain amount of money. Okay, and this was making difficult the operationalization of this kind of measures. Okay, it took only some change in the legislation, the national legislation, to then allow in the future similar initiatives to function properly, you know. So this was the kind of public support, national policy support, that change that was required. Then it had nothing to do with the sustainability or applicability of the measure in essence. It was just that it lifted this kind of restriction that didn't allow the implementation in the first place. So that was all that I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Tommy and Christos, for your kind of availability, but especially for your high competence on the topic.
My signature somewhere.
Thank you very much, Luca. The pleasure was all ours.
Yes.
We
had some fun.
Yeah. So before giving the floor to Jordi to wrap up, I just remind that we will prepare a short report on the webinar, and we will spread around to all attendees, all registered people, to keep let's say the cream of our discussion and the cream of what this beautiful project carried out. Thanks a lot. Please, Jordi.
Yes, thank you. Some few words after the session. Well, we will be sending a satisfaction survey after the meeting together with the report, and we will be also organizing our last webinar before summer break next Tuesday, 12th of July, where we will showcase the approach of PostBMed 2, which well, the name of the webinar will be Reconcile the Tourist Use of a Beach with Posidonia oceanica Conservation, and we will have like IUCN and Région Sud with us showcasing the different results of the project. So this being said, it was a pleasure having you here today with us, and we will be sharing with you the report in the tomorrow or the day after. So thank you very much for your time and for your participation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.